If we are to believe that fear of what a tyrant may do is an excuse to kill thousands and thousands of civilians with a campaign labeled shock and awe, which sounds more like a cartoon comic strip to me than a foreign policy, how do we avoid millions of people around the world in other nations fearing what this administration will do, since this administration killed a great many people who had every reason to hate and fear Saddam Hussein much more than people on this side of the world ever did?
Well, you raise an enormously important point. I don't like the implication, because I don't think it's accurate, that we somehow purposefully killed a bunch of civilians. That's not true. Well, this was a war that was clearly fought with the intention of minimizing the inevitable damage that comes from a war, but it was fought very carefully to minimize the damage that would be done to non-combatants. And it's horrible when there's damage to non-combatants, but one of the things that people like Saddam Hussein do is that they hide behind civilians, and there's inevitable problems. I mean, there were lots of Germans killed in World War II also, and Japanese, as Mr. Crittenden pointed out. And it wasn't that they were killed because people were intending to do damage to innocent people. But the fundamental point you're raising is an enormously important point. And it was one that we gave a lot of thought to. I mean, I had many discussions with foreign colleagues, and they raised questions like, this was in the 2002 period mainly, they raised questions like, the United States overthrew the Taliban. Okay, we understand that. Now you're contemplating overthrowing the government of Iraq. Where does this end? What right does the United States have to decide which governments around the world it's going to overthrow? I mean, do you just have a license? Is this, America is more powerful than everybody else. This is a problem. Who's going to check American power? Does the President of the United States have unchecked power to overthrow any government that he wants to overthrow? And I heard these arguments, and I came back and I talked about them at some length. And I think one of the most interesting things, personally, what I think was one of the more interesting things in the book is I reproduce a memo that I wrote in August of 2002. I don't remember exactly where it is. It's at the end of one of the chapters. I reproduce a memo that was called something like Anticipatory Self-Defense, and it had some other title. But I think that the term anticipatory self-defense was in the title of the memo. And what I said in that memo was I recounted the same point that you're making and that I just recounted, that there's concern about unchecked power in the hands of the American president. And I said, and actually, this hall is a good place to make this point. I said, anybody familiar with American political history has to understand that we came into existence as a country in opposition to the idea of unchecked power. So anybody who raises the dangers of unchecked power has to get a sympathetic hearing from the United States. It's a serious concern. And I looked at the question of, is the power of the United States president really unchecked? And I said, there are various checks that work on the President of the United States. There are domestic checks, our own constitutional checks, Congress, free press, the judiciary, we have laws. There are also international checks. And we have to understand that when we do something abroad, if we don't have international support, if we do something that's very controversial and we don't succeed, and people are antagonized, they, as sovereign countries, can withhold cooperation from us. I mean, not simply condemn us, but in practical ways, damage us. And we take that into account in advance, and that actually represents a check on our behavior. I mean, if we're going to do something in the world, and like the war in Iraq, I mean, we thought about the danger. We even, in this Parade of Horribles memo that Mr. Crittenden referred to, that Secretary Rumsfeld produced in October of 2002, talked about that and said, if things go badly in Iraq, it could hurt our ability to cooperate with other countries around the world. It could damage us in various ways. All of those things represent checks. Now, what I then said in this memorandum was, that's not an enormously satisfying answer for the people who are talking about checking American power, because the domestic checks and the international checks still leave the decision in the hands of the US president. Well, what option do we have beyond having the decision in the hands of the US president? Well, the obvious one that people propose is the United States shouldn't take an action of this kind unless the Security Council at the United Nations says it's okay. And, we looked at that and said, that's actually not what international law says. That's not what the UN Charter says. If the UN Charter had said that, the evidence is the US Senate would not have approved ratification of the UN Charter. I mean, ultimately, it was not realistic, it was not even arguably lawful for the President of the United States to say that he would not take action when he, as the elected representative of the American people, decided that action was necessary to defend the United States from serious security threats, that he would not take that action unless some foreign power said aye. I mean, unless the Chinese approved it, or the Russians approved it, or the French approved it, the President of the United States would not take action that he believed was necessary in American defense. So, I mean, at the end of this analysis, I said, there are certain checks that work on the President, domestic and international. The main check that a lot of the foreigners would like to see, which is that the United States won't act unless a bunch of other foreign countries approve the action, I don't think is consistent with our Constitution and the President's responsibilities. And so people aren't going to be satisfied, but we should at least recognize that there is real power and substance and seriousness in the objection, in the concerns. And we as a power have to act accordingly. And this memo that I did on this subject, and I was not the only one in the government who was thinking along these lines, and we were basically quite respectful of that point of view, but we understood that we were not coming up with an answer that's going to satisfy the critics. But this memo that I did on the subject, Secretary Rumsfeld sent to Condi Rice, who then sent it to all of the members of the National Security Council and all the deputies. And I think it's important to understand that, while we can't satisfy the critics, we certainly respected this extremely serious argument. And it's a dilemma, and it just remains a dilemma.